recognized that what was happening was that the criteria that they were talking about were all very car related. And so we were concerned about that as the criteria for which an alignment would be used to judge the alignments. So the City Council in September passed the criteria that told the CTF that they could use the EPA guidelines, which is much more a sustainable approach to transportation. Next. In October of last year, then the Mayor and Council adopted a 6-lane road, 6 including 2 transit, and that of course was a change from the original, which was 6 lanes plus 2 transit, otherwise known as 8 lanes or 150 feet wide. So they also adopted a conceptual alignment, and that is of course what we're debating right now. In December, the RTA approved 6 lanes as maintaining functionality. That was a big step because they had been asserting that the only thing they could approve was 8 lanes. In February 20th, just about 2 weeks ago, the staff released its preferred plan. We have it posted here on the wall, and we can talk to you about it in more detail. You can see it in scale, which you can see the buildings are actually being taken out. And on Wednesday at midnight, the public comment period ends. Next.
I think that might have been, according to Steve, maybe extended to March 19th.
Is that, well, that, okay. We can hear if that's been changed. Next. Who are we? In 2010, Laura T. Bewley, Mark Coleman, John O'Dowd, Paul Mackey, and others met to discuss the impact of this 150-foot 8-lane road on Midtown businesses and Midtown housing neighborhoods. The group met with elected officials. They held 2 meetings with businesses, and then in 2000 it was officially formed as a coalition of businesses, individuals, and neighborhoods. What we've done, we've brought before the CTF new thinking about transportation, about what's happening in transit. We've spoken up for the preservation of our very rich architectural and unique asset in the mid-modern buildings. We've written short essays on expositions on a number of topics, including what is functionality. Those are all back at the back table if you'd like to look at them. And I think we've been a respectful, challenging, critically thinking, creative voice for making Tucson a better place, a sustainable place. And tonight you're going to hear about the topics that we think are really important in thinking about this project. And we will challenge you to join in making Tucson a sustainable community with cutting-edge thinking guiding our decisions for creating an exciting, vibrant place to live and thrive.
So here's the original traffic study that Margot referenced from back in the mid-'80s that had the original kind of conceptual designs for the widening of Broadway and some of the original traffic projections. And this is what was the basis for Broadway being listed on the 2006 RTA ballot as one of 51 overall projects. So this was kind of the justification that 20 years later this project shows up on a ballot. So this was early traffic projections in 2012. So they were the traffic projections back in the mid-'80s, and then in 2012, as the design process started to ramp up and they did the Citizens Task Force, the city did an updated traffic study in early 2012. So just to orient you a bit, so the black lines here are actual traffic counts, and of course they're going all over the place. So the 2012 study originally had that red line going way up there. That was what they said. And then one other thing I want you to note is this number from back here in 1984, there's 37,500. We're going to come back to that, so note that. At the same time that the city was putting out these new traffic projections for these really elevated traffic numbers, nationally, people were already recognizing a change in travel behavior, particularly among millennials. There were fewer of them were getting driver's license, waiting until much older to even get them. Fewer were owning cars, more taking transit, biking, those kind of things. So it really indicated that cars were no longer the status symbol that they were for my generation and older. So that particularly the younger folks were really starting to see a change in travel behavior. Okay. This also showed up in the Federal Highway Administration, their National Vehicle Miles Traveled, or VMT. National researchers have noted that in about 2004 is this real strong, what they call an inflection point, where that black line actually really kind of changed. So all their traffic projections keep kind of shooting up at the same angle, but the actual vehicle miles traveled on a national basis kind of flatlined and started to decline about 2004. So locally, we saw this as well. So these are actual traffic counts from here in Tucson. So this is Broadway, Speedway, and 22nd. So Broadway is the green line.
Is our next speaker, and she is a retired professor of urban planning. She has long been a community activist, including the time she served on the Tucson City Council from 1975 to 1977.
Well, I think you're getting a picture of what we see going on. I'm going to be talking about the historic aspects of Broadway. And we believe that Tucson is something very special. It has a variety of architectural styles that have developed over the last 250 years. This is not anywhere USA, but a place distinctive for the mountains on the four sides of the valley and the buildings, the homes, and the businesses that grew out of this desert environment. I'm going to share some of the unique sense of place that is the Sunshine Mile, that 2-mile stretch of Broadway from Euclid to Country Club. Hard to imagine it, but in the 1930s, Country Club was a dirt road and was on the edge of town. Next slide. We find that this 2-mile stretch of Broadway has a sense of place, local businesses, destinations that residents from surrounding neighborhoods can bike and walk to. And after nearly 30 years of being threatened with demolition, the buildings are looking a little run down. But 50 years ago, they were the manifestation of hope, optimism, and excitement of the post-World War II boom years. Next slide. The mid-century modern architecture was perceived as part of the progressive idealism, reflecting a faith in science and technology. As a newly developing city, there was not a tremendous amount of established wealth in the community, so utilitarian modern architecture was a reasonable response to the needs of a growing Tucson. What's so wonderful about this street is that we have not just a single building that are important, or single buildings, but whole blocks that communicate the enthusiasm of the period, expressed in new materials, new ways of building, and an understanding of the economics of starting a business. In Solot Plaza, some of the shops are only 20 feet wide, but 100 feet deep, designed specifically for starting new businesses. Tucson's most influential architects designed them: Bernard Friedman, Fred Jobs, William Wiles, Anne Rysdale, Nicholas Sakeller, Charles Cox, Kane Nelson and Ware, Howard Peck, and others. Next. Anne Rysdale is the only female registered architect during this period. She was commissioned by Norris C. Owens to design Pima Plaza in 1957, a single-story office building. Amenities contemporary at the time included fully furnished office suites with refrigeration, soundproof partitions, and a telephone answering service. It was so successful that in 1959 she was hired to add a second story with 32 new offices, a coffee shop, and 2 patios. The building remains today true to the original design with decorative rock walls and an exterior steel staircase and balcony. She also designed, next, the Haas Building, a dramatic 2-story building with glass facade nestled between a row of single-story commercial buildings. How tragic it would be to lose these buildings, part of our architectural history. And as a woman, important to know that Tucson encouraged talent, whatever the gender, in its development. It would take another 15 years for Tucson to have its first woman council member. Next. Buildings get repurposed, but their shape and design continues. What started out as a photo center in 1947 has morphed through a Unicopper Center in 1970 to today, Art Latino Americano store. Advanced as the brightest spot on the Sunshine Mile, next, the borough's furniture showroom, and some of us remember it as a furniture store. Now the Child and Family Resource Center was built in 1957. Designed by Phoenix architect Ralph Haver, it is modernism at its purest, with glass curtain walls and post and beam construction. The roof cantilevers well beyond the glass walls, shading the windows, while creating a scale and shelter along the face of the building. Imagine this wonderful Tudor-style home repurposed as a tea room or a French restaurant. Next. Sola Plaza is a collection of small businesses now housing Tucson Tamale, moving east past a series of small shops and services to Bruce's Lock Shop. Tucked into the eastern end, next, is a joyful expression of desert modernism, designed by Nicholas Sakeller. Built in 1957, this narrow storefront is defined by 2 parallel walls, bridged by an open, fully glazed storefront. The roof structure is cantilevered over the sidewalk, and an opening in the canopy allows a single iconic palm tree to extend high beyond the roof. Go on, next. Sakeller would also design the Kelly Building, now the Continental Building, so distinctive with its second-floor piano key pattern of vertical windows and panels with softened edges separated by vertical fins. The driveway entrance passes through the building. Next, very striking in the 2800 block is Dr. Martin Snyder's Podiatry Building, constructed in 1966, Howard Peck, architect. On either side of the recess-centered entranceway are brilliant white sculptural cast concrete relief panels by the artist Charles Clement. The classic mid-century aluminum letterforms on the fascia announce the building. Next, developers John and Helen Murphy were looking way beyond Tucson and Phoenix for something special when they brought Juan Warner Ibas from Mexico City in 1961 to design an expansion to the Broadway Village Shopping Center. With its terracotta saints and philosophers on the roof, the Murphy Building at 2934 still has its brick barrel vaults and scalloped parapets. Next, Friedman and Jobs are represented by a series of buildings in this area. There is the lovely and striking Hirsch's Shoes with its angled walls that create a dynamic entrance with a sloping exposed frame canopy flanked on either side by cantilevered window places. Next, the Saltzman Building, now Western Dental, functioned as a corner billboard with glass curtain walls designed to showcase the merchandise, but now they're mostly covered with curtains. Next, the iconic Valley National Bank, now Chase, on the corner of Country Club and Broadway, was commissioned to express a progressive image of the banking industry. Built in 1971, it is not yet historic register eligible, but is architecturally significant. The building is a complex composition of curved walls that create a series of inner and exterior spaces. Next. This is one of a handful of buildings in Tucson that incorporates the abstract bas-relief into the building, the expressionistic friezes by Philip Sanderson. Next. While I don't expect you to see each building on the map, I wanted you to get an impression of how many contributing and register-eligible structures we're talking about. And those are all the orange and red buildings. The red ones are actually on the historic register, the orange ones are register eligible. In summary, these 2 miles are a treasure trove of Tucson's adaptation for the mid-century modern architectural style to the desert climate. It is instructive for students in not only our U of A architectural school, but others around the world to see the real thing, not just photographs. There are lessons to be learned from creative solutions to living and working in our environment. It establishes that bridge between generations. Some of us remember when these buildings were built. Next. And it is our culture and history. Sustainability, using the resources we need today, but preserving them also for future generations, demands we treasure and preserve these buildings. The proposed alignment either demolishes or renders unusable many of these buildings. Tucson can do better. We need creative, smart design that honors our past and our culture. With Mark Fink. Mark was a county planner for 30 years. He's retired now, and he's also a current member of the Planning Commission of Tucson.
A couple of questions. Anybody here not want good transit down Broadway? I didn't think there would be. Anybody here not want a vibrant business environment down Broadway? Well, that's good too. Now, the trick question, is there anybody here who feels it's okay to widen Broadway, destroy businesses, so you can, quote, accommodate transit? One person. All right, next slide. What I'm here to do is to talk about that very issue and hopefully convince you that that is not really feasible. Transit and land use are intertwined and mutually related. Transit is the means by which people access their desired destinations. In other words, transit is not a good in and of itself. Transit is a good because it allows people to do what they need to do. So therefore, you need to create places and destinations because the issue is accessibility to needed destinations, not mobility. So for example, and I'm really showing my age here, gets stuck on the MTA and rides forever beneath the streets of Boston. He had fabulous mobility. Problem is, he couldn't get anywhere he needed to go. So the issue is accessibility. Your transit system needs to get you to where you need to go, which are places. And the last issue, and this is really important because we keep hearing about downtown, downtown. Everything is focused on downtown. And it's great that downtown is reviving. When I first moved here, downtown was fairly active, and then it went through a long period where it was pretty semi-dead, and now it's reviving again. But downtown appeals to a particular demographic. It's mainly an entertainment sector, and as we get more and more students down there, downtown might really change. But downtown doesn't provide all the services that you need. So that's why you need lots of other places for people to go to, which would be linked by transit. So in other words, if you don't have places, you won't have transit, and this isn't just my opinion, but any of you saw Jarrett Walker speak, he said the same thing. So in an urban setting, walkability and vibrancy are primarily derived from the built environment. And this quote is from Jeff Speck in his book, Walkability. Fabulous book, and he's also a great writer. He's really fun, you'll chuckle, but he's also really smart. In their quest to be more sustainable, cities need to remember that for the typical pedestrian, the most mundane storefront is more interesting than the most luxuriant landscape. Green spaces in a city are a lovely, salubrious thing, but they are also dull in comparison to shop fronts and street vendors. So in other words, what he's saying, and I think this is really true, people will walk in places where there are interesting places to go to. Yes, you want some green spaces, but they need to be worked into an overall district. And push comes to shove, it's the places that are more important, not the green spaces. You want, people aren't going to just walk down where you see trees and such, but they will walk to places that's really interesting. So next. So for example, this is 4th Avenue. It's taken from Antigone Books. I have to do a plug. My wife owns the store, the greatest bookstore in the country, in my perfectly unbiased opinion. Looking across at Chase. The buildings are not incredibly fabulous. Some of them are not historic. You don't see a lot of trees. But what you do see on 4th Avenue are lots of people. It's a destination. Next. So compare that to Campbell in the stretch between Elm and Grant, where they widen the heck out of the road. It's very nicely landscaped, very pretty, and you'll notice there's a total lack of people there. I've never really seen anybody walking, except one time I saw my wife walking because we were both walking the street to get to the corner of Grant, and we ended up on a porch in the street. So this is what happens when you're just concerned about landscaping and maybe some shade. If there's no place to walk to, there won't be anybody walking. So therefore, what do you need? Vibrant, viable business districts, especially for local independent businesses, require a high density of businesses. And the reason why I bring up, and I'll talk more about local businesses, this is one of the goals of Plan Tucson. It was one of the goals of Imagine Greater Tucson, much of which Plan Tucson borrowed from. And it was also part of the draft goals and visions for the Citizens Task Force. So the reason why you need a high density of businesses is you need to create synergy among the various businesses. The district itself acts as the destination, not just the individual businesses. So if you're looking at 4th Avenue as an example, and it's probably the prime example in town, you hear people talking about, let's go down to 4th Avenue and hang out and walk up and down the street. Tourists go down 4th Avenue. It's not, yes, people do go to certain destinations, but I can tell you, for instance, my wife's store would have been out of business years ago if she only relied on what is an amazingly loyal clientele. It just doesn't provide enough. She also relies upon tourists, both from within the city and from outside. And therefore, you need streets as narrow as possible with slower traffic speeds, and Linda talked about the need for that. But other reasons why you need narrow streets. One is you need a physical and psychological connection between the two sides of the street. If you widen Broadway too much, what will happen is you're on the north side, you have no sense that there's really businesses and stuff on the south side, and vice versa. So it becomes separate, and then each side is having to hopefully develop enough vibrancy on its own, which is very difficult to do. Two, it allows for identification of businesses, particularly non-chains. The wider the street, the higher the speeds, the less time you have to identify the business. That's why McDonald's has got arches, because you see arches, you know it's McDonald's. But other more interesting businesses and restaurants don't have that luxury. And then finally, which has been discussed in great detail, is the whole sense of pedestrian and bicycle safety. Next. So again, 4th Avenue, you can see the street's narrow, lots of people, there's some tables out there, people eat at them, people hanging out. One lane each way, and transit seems to work really well, and you have this great area. Next. So local business activity means more money is retained within the community. So this is information from Arizona Local First, which, if anybody doesn't know, is a nonprofit devoted to promoting local independent businesses. So according to studies, several studies have been done, the average for every dollar spent in a local independent business, 43 cents of that dollar is retained in the local community. For chains, it's 13 cents. This is on average. So you can see dollar for dollar, square foot for square foot, local businesses actually provide a bigger economic impact to the community. And this makes sense because local businesses will hire other local businesses to do all the stuff that they need to do. But also in terms of creating a more sustainable community, not only do these local business districts then promote walkability and bikeability, which then obviously has those impacts, but from a social aspect, it also creates a better community. Local businesses, for instance, are far more likely to give to local charities, to be involved in local events. To give you one example, For years and years, one of the charity things I do is money for Toys for Tots at Christmas time or other similar charities. There's a local business, Whiz Kids. He gives me a 25% discount when I go buy toys from him. Talking to Target or Toys R Us, forget it. There's just no way because it's a big corporate business. Again, here to create high business density, you need deep but narrow lots to maximize the number of businesses. Again, this is Sola Plaza. You're looking at 3 businesses right here. These are narrow but very long lots. The reason why this is important, next slide, is that wider lots can increase rents and prices because these costs are often based on the street frontage. That's what business owners, sellers, or developers are going to base on. And only chains can afford these. That's, of course, if the remnant lots that are provided are even deep enough. Shallow lots, and we would say less than 100 feet deep, are really not very economically viable. There's no market, and I would even say that the deeper the lot, the better. And this is the lot, not the building. Buildings are going to be narrower. And what we found in this process a year and a half ago, the design team came up with the amazing theory that you could have parcels, lots that are 60 feet deep with buildings that are 40 feet deep. So those of you know where Feezy's used to be, that defunct tattoo parlor on Broadway and Stewart, it's now the Bevel weird stuff. That building is 80 feet. So essentially cut that in half and imagine you really have any kind of economic vitality. But you don't need to take our word for it. The design team hired a firm out of Berkeley, California, EPS, and they did a draft study on this area. And what they discovered was, one, there were no local developers who expressed any interest in developing Broadway with very shallow lots. They didn't really define shallow, but they did characterize Feast, the restaurant which is on Speedway, as being a shallow lot. That lot's about 175 feet deep. The building, I know, is between 120 and 130 feet deep. So they were even thinking that was a shallow lot. They were saying it's going to require a lot of property assemblage to make a larger lot, and what you could even develop this property, you're going to have wide, shallow lots, which means there are going to be chains, and you're going to have a lot fewer businesses. The other source came from Wolf Brody, who's head of the Valley Light Rail in the Phoenix area. He came down and spoke to the task force. Great talk. And when he was talking, not only did he say you either plan for cars or you plan for transit, you can't do both because you end up with neither. He then talked about Camelback Road, which he said was the biggest mistake they made in their light rail system in Phoenix. And Camelback Road is the one place where they widened the road and wiped out businesses so they could put in transit. And what they ended up with were a lot of remnant lots that were 65 to 70 foot deep, which were completely and totally unviable economically, and all they're used is for parking. And so you have this incredibly ugly landscape. I'd suggest even going to Google Maps, go look at Camelback, and you can see from the air just how horrendous it is. So let me give you an example of 4th Avenue, the whole central place, and shallow lot or not shallow lot. The lots on 4th Avenue, amazingly enough, are about 150 feet deep. The building's about 90 to 120 feet deep. This is from essentially the back end of the sidewalk to the alley. So these are lots that are much deeper than much of the properties that are going to be left over if the staff alternative is adopted. So imagine if you rotated all these buildings, and many of them are 20 or 30 feet wide, maybe 40 feet wide. If you rotated them so you have long frontage on the road and a shallow lot, then you probably reduce the number of businesses on that street by 60 to 75%. In other words, you would kill 4th Avenue. There would be no 4th Avenue because you have so few businesses. What would be the point? 4th Avenue is also, and you've seen some pictures, has minimal landscaping, has intermittent shading. There's not 8-foot sidewalks and 8 foot of landscaping like on Campbell Avenue, but there's lots of interesting places to go regardless of what your interests are. Not everybody obviously wants to get tattoos, but they're great restaurants, fabulous bookstores, of course, and all sorts of other places to go. People go there. You don't see anybody walking on Campbell Avenue. So again, you can see on the street, parking lane, and then as the design of the roadway affects the adjacent land uses. Making the roadway walkable and having nothing to walk to makes no sense. It's a big waste of resources. The proposed alignment that's being presented to you destroys the very uniqueness of the businesses and the historic buildings that make the Sunshine Mile special. And just as importantly, even if you don't like the existing businesses, leaves remnant parcels that are too shallow to develop economically. So what you'll end up with is an economic and social wasteland, and Tucson can do so much better.
Here to talk about money. There are so many intangible and unquantifiable costs of this project to our community that other people have discussed. And I'm sure that you can think of others yourself. But even just looking at the money, just looking only at the money, it becomes really clear that this project is unaffordable for our community. As Colby has pointed out, in fact, widening the street and adding car lanes is entirely unnecessary, and so arguably the entire $74 million that they expect to spend on it is a complete waste that could be more profitably deployed elsewhere. But I'm not even going to make that argument. I'm going to say, okay, let's accept that we're going to do some changes on Broadway, right? Even assuming the project was warranted, the current wide and destructive design that's posted up here is entirely unnecessary. It's excessively costly in dollars. And a narrower version would be a much better investment for our community. So the next slide shows us the budget. Who's paying for the project?
There are a few things about following the money that I think the folks here ought to know about. HDR is doing a study on this so far. I have a design by HDR that shows a road downtown 850 feet wide. Can you imagine that, 2 city blocks wide? I have it in the documents. There was a method in the madness in doing that, and it wasn't the public good. I have some other documents, one right here, where earlier a hotel was bought on Broadway and demolished, that never needed to be bought and demolished according to the Air Force's engineering department. It was owned by a Superior Court judge in town, and he made a fortune off of it. This guy evidently knows about it. They also bought the Volvo car dealership on Broadway on the south side, saying it was for widening the road. There was never a plan back then to widen it down to the south side, nor there is now. And we paid $2 million for that property. There was also a study by PAG about the final mile of aviation downtown, in which they were either out to lunch or falsified the traffic flow document. It would cost us $50 million more to do it the way they want to do it. And I've got the documents to confirm this stuff.